The night sky burned. A cascade of fiery debris streaked across the heavens as Earth's defenders clashed with an unstoppable alien force. Cities crumbled beneath relentless bombardments, entire continents fell silent, and the once vast armies of humanity were reduced to scattered pockets of desperate resistance. The invaders, a species known only as the Vreed, were as enigmatic as they were merciless. Towering biomechanical creatures wielding weapons that defied comprehension, they tore through Earth's defenses like a hot blade through ice. Humanity's cries for mercy went unanswered. This was not a war, it was extermination. Deep beneath the smoldering ruins of what had once been New York City, a small band of survivors gathered in the cavernous remains of an old subway station. Dust hung thick in the air, dimly illuminated by flickering lights scavenged from the ruins above. Among them stood Captain Elias Kane, a battle-hardened soldier whose sharp eyes and grizzled demeanor bore the weight of years spent in relentless combat. Kane had seen the fall of countless cities, had lost friends and family to the Vreed, and yet he stood unbroken. Beside him, Dr. Myra Solis, a brilliant astrophysicist, adjusted the settings on a jury-rigged device that pulsed faintly with blue light. Myra was the team's brain, her genius the only hope of deciphering the invaders' technology. Standing further back, clutching a battered rifle with trembling hands, was Jonah Whitlock, a civilian who had lost everything but his will to fight. His presence was a testament to the resilience of humanity, a refusal to go quietly into extinction. "We're out of time," Kane growled, his voice echoing in the dim chamber. His gaze shifted toward Myra, who remained focused on the device. "Can that thing even work, or are we just sitting here waiting to die?" "It'll work," Myra snapped, her voice tight with concentration. "But I need another minute. If we can hijack their signal, we might have a chance to disrupt their communications. Maybe even push them back." Jonah swallowed hard, his knuckles white around the rifle. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we die here," Kane said bluntly, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "But we take as many of them with us as we can." Before anyone could respond, the ground shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as the distant roar of explosions grew louder. The Vreed were closing in. Kane's hand shot to his comms device. "Fall back positions. Everyone, prepare for..." A deafening screech tore through the station, drowning out his words. It wasn't a sound made by any human or machine, it was alien, primal, and filled with malice. The lights flickered again, plunging the station into near darkness. Shadows moved in the gloom, and Kane raised his weapon instinctively. "They're here," Jonah whispered, his voice barely audible. The first of the Vreed emerged from the shadows, its massive form scraping against the walls of the station. Its body was a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, with spindly limbs that moved with unsettling precision. Bioluminescent eyes glowed a sickly green, scanning the room before locking onto the survivors. Kane opened fire, his rifle spitting bullets that pinged harmlessly off the creature's armored hide. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Myra, move!" Myra grabbed the device and ran, her heart pounding as more Vreed poured into the station. Jonah hesitated for a split second, his rifle trembling in his grip, before unleashing a desperate spray of bullets. The alien creatures advanced relentlessly, undeterred by the human resistance. Kane tossed a grenade, the explosion briefly illuminating the station in a flash of orange light. One of the Vreed staggered, its limbs blown apart, but two more took its place. The survivors scrambled through a narrow tunnel, the echoes of their footsteps mixing with the unholy cacophony of alien screeches and gunfire. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, a forgotten maintenance bay lined with old, rusting machinery. Myra set the device down on a makeshift table, her hands moving frantically over its controls. "Buy me 30 seconds!" she yelled. Kane and Jonah positioned themselves at the entrance, their weapons trained on the darkness. The first Vreed to emerge met a hail of gunfire, but the sheer size of the alien force was overwhelming. For every creature they downed, two more took its place. Kane's ammunition ran dry, and he drew his knife, bracing for close combat. "Time's up!" Myra shouted, slamming her hand onto the device's activation panel. A pulse of blue energy rippled through the chamber, crackling as it expanded outward. The Vreed hesitated, their movements faltering as the pulse disrupted their internal systems. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though humanity had found a weapon capable of turning the tide. Then everything went wrong. The blue light intensified, the pulse growing unstable. Sparks erupted from the device as it emitted a low, ominous hum. Myra's eyes widened in horror. It's overloading. I can't stop it. Before she could react, the device unleashed a second pulse, this one dark and malevolent. The Vreed froze, their glowing eyes flickering before dimming completely. The silence that followed was deafening, the sudden absence of noise almost as jarring as the battle itself. But it was not a victory. From the depths of the chamber, something stirred. A low rumble reverberated through the air, growing steadily louder. The survivors exchanged wary glances, their weapons trained on the shadows. Kane stepped forward cautiously, his knife at the ready. And then they saw it. A form emerged from the darkness, larger and more terrifying than any Vreed they had faced. Its presence radiated an unnatural power, its very silhouette bending the light around it. This was not one of the invaders, it was something else entirely. Something older. Something that had been listening. The creature let out a deep, guttural growl, its many eyes glowing like molten embers. Kane tightened his grip on the knife, his heart hammering in his chest. Myra stood frozen, her mind racing to comprehend what she was seeing. Jonah took a shaky step back, his voice trembling as he whispered, "What the hell is that?" The creature moved closer, its every step shaking the ground beneath their feet. It leaned forward, and for a moment, it almost seemed to smile. Then the lights went out. The chamber was silent except for the sound of ragged breathing. The darkness pressed in like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Kane gripped his knife, his instincts screaming that whatever had emerged from the shadows was far beyond anything they had faced before. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom, but the creature's glowing eyes and massive silhouette were all he could see. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the silence was shattered. The creature lunged, its massive form moving with unnatural speed. Kane barely had time to dive out of the way as a massive claw struck where he'd been standing, sending chunks of concrete flying. Myra screamed, scrambling backward, and Jonah opened fire, the flash of his rifle illuminating the monstrous figure. The bullet seemed to have no effect, bouncing off its armor like hide. The creature let out a roar, a sound so deep it vibrated through their very bones, and advanced on Jonah. "Move!" Kane barked, tackling Jonah out of the way just as the creature's claws slashed through the air. They hit the ground hard, Jonah's rifle skittering away. Kane rolled to his feet, knife in hand, and placed himself between the creature and the others. "Myra, get us some light. Now!" Myra fumbled with her equipment, her hand shaking as she activated a small handheld lamp. The dim light revealed the full horror of the creature, a massive, chitinous beast with a segmented body and too many limbs, each ending in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes glowed like burning coals, and its maw was lined with rows of serrated teeth. It let out another roar, and Kane tightened his grip on the knife. "We can't fight this thing," Jonah gasped, scrambling to his feet. "What do we do?" Kane didn't answer. His mind raced, searching for a solution, but nothing came. The creature was too fast, too strong. They were outmatched. Then Myra's voice cut through the chaos. "The pulse!" she shouted. "It disabled the Vreed, it might work on this thing too." Kane glanced at her, then back at the creature, which was advancing again. "Do it. I need time," Myra cried, frantically adjusting the settings on the damaged device. "I don't know if it'll hold together." By her that time, Kane said to Jonah, his voice calm despite the fear coursing through him. He charged the creature, dodging its claws and slashing at its legs with his knife. The blade barely left a scratch, but it was enough to draw its attention. "Come on, you ugly bastard," he snarled, backing away and trying to lead it away from the others. "Let's see what you've got." The creature lunged, and Kane barely avoided its claws. He rolled to the side, coming up in a crouch, and threw a rock at its head. It turned toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing, and let out a guttural growl. Jonah, meanwhile, had retrieved his rifle and was firing in short bursts, aiming for the creature's joints and eyes. The bullets still did little damage, but they were enough to distract it, giving Kane a chance to reposition. Myra worked frantically, sweat dripping down her face as she recalibrated the device. Sparks flew from the damaged components, and she muttered a string of curses under her breath. The creature roared again, lunging at Kane, who narrowly avoided being crushed. He was getting tired, his movement slowing, and he knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. "Myra!" he shouted. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." "Almost there," Myra replied, her fingers flying over the controls. The device let out a high-pitched whine, and the blue light began to pulse again, flickering erratically. "Come on, come on." The creature turned toward her, its glowing eyes narrowing. It seemed to sense the danger, and it began to move toward her, its massive claws tearing through the debris in its path. Jonah stepped in front of her, firing wildly, but the creature didn't even slow down. Kane pushed himself to his feet, his legs screaming in protest, and threw his knife. It struck the creature in the side of its head, embedding itself in one of its eyes. The creature let out a deafening roar, thrashing in pain, and turned back toward him. "That's right," Kane muttered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. "Come on, you son of a..." The device activated. A pulse of blue energy rippled through the chamber, washing over the creature. It froze mid-lunge, its glowing eyes flickering. The survivors held their breath, waiting to see if it would fall like the Vreathe. But instead of collapsing, the creature let out a low, rumbling growl. The light in its eyes returned, brighter and more intense than before. The pulse hadn't disabled it, it had only made it angrier. Kane stared in disbelief. "What the hell?" Myra looked at the device, her face pale. It's feeding off the energy. The pulse is making it stronger." "Then turn it off," Jonah shouted, backing away as the creature began to move again. "I can't," Myra cried. "It's unstable, I can't shut it down." The creature let out a roar and lunged at them. Kane grabbed Myra and Jonah, pulling them out of the way just in time. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, sending shards of metal flying. The creature roared again, its massive form silhouetted against the blue light of the dying pulse. "We have to move," Kane said, his voice grim. "Now." They ran, the creature's roars echoing behind them. The maintenance bay led to another tunnel, which opened into the remains of an old sewer system. The stench was overwhelming, but they didn't stop. Kane led the way, his instincts guiding him through the maze of tunnels. Behind them, the creature's roars grew louder, closer. As they ran, Kane's mind raced. The Vreathe were one thing, an enemy they could fight, however slim the odds. But this creature was something else entirely. It was stronger, faster, and seemingly impervious to their weapons. And worst of all, it was hunting them. They needed a plan. They needed a way to fight back. But most of all, they needed to survive. For now, that was all they could do. As the days passed, the survivors regrouped with what remained of the human resistance. The encounter with the creature had left them shaken, but it had also raised new questions. What was it? Where had it come from? And, most troubling of all, was it working with the Vreathe or against them? Kane, Myra, and Jonah became key figures in the resistance. Kane's leadership and combat skills made him a natural leader, while Myra's knowledge of alien technology proved invaluable. Jonah, despite his inexperience, showed a surprising resilience and determination that inspired others. The resistance began to adapt. Using what little Vreeth technology they had scavenged, Myra worked to develop new weapons and defenses. The humans learned to fight smarter, using guerrilla tactics and hit-and-run attacks to chip away at the invaders' forces. They set traps, sabotaged supply lines, and used the terrain to their advantage. Slowly but surely, they began to turn the tide. But the creature was never far from their minds. Sightings of similar entities began to surface, monstrous beings that seemed to emerge from nowhere, wreaking havoc on both humans and Vreeth alike. It became clear that these creatures were not allies of the invaders. They were something else entirely. As the resistance grew stronger, so too did the stakes. The Vreeth, once seemingly unstoppable, began to show signs of desperation. They deployed new weapons, more advanced and terrifying than anything humanity had seen before. And yet, even as they fought back against the invaders, the humans couldn't shake the feeling that the true threat was still out there, waiting. Tensions within the resistance began to rise. Supplies were running low, and every victory came at a steep cost. People began to question their leaders, their strategies, and each other. Paranoia set in, fueled by rumors of spies and saboteurs within their ranks. And then, just as they were beginning to gain the upper hand, everything changed. During a daring raid on a Vreeth command center, Kane and his team discovered a transmission, a message intercepted from deep space. It was in no language they recognized, but its tone was unmistakable. It was a warning. Something was coming. Something worse. As they decoded the message, a chilling realization set in. The Vreeth weren't the invaders. They were the refugees. And the true enemy was almost here. The realization that the Vreeth were refugees sent shockwaves through the resistance. It wasn't just the message itself, it was the way it reframed everything they had been fighting for. For months, humanity had believed they were defending their planet from a conquering alien force. Now, the truth was harder to swallow. The invaders were running, fleeing from a far greater threat. It made the resistance's victories feel hollow, the sacrifices even heavier. Still, there was no time for reflection. The war raged on, and whatever the Vreeth were fleeing from was drawing closer. Kane couldn't shake the look in the Vreeth commander's eyes during the raid. For a moment, just a moment, it hadn't been the cold, calculated glare of a military leader. It had been fear. Pure, unrelenting fear. Kane's hands gripped the edges of the map table in their makeshift war room, his knuckles white. He hated the uncertainty, the growing sense that they were fighting an enemy they didn't fully understand. He hated feeling like they were just pawns in a much larger game. Myra stood on the other side of the table, poring over the decrypted fragments of the alien message. Her face was illuminated by the glow of her tablet, exhaustion etched into every line. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured, half to herself. "If they're running, why bring the fight to us? Why not negotiate? Why not explain?" Jonah, seated nearby and cleaning his rifle, scoffed. Maybe they thought we'd shoot first and ask questions later. Would they have been wrong? Kane countered, his voice low but sharp. The room fell silent. Jonah didn't reply. Myra finally looked up, her eyes meeting Kane's. "We're missing something. There's more to this than what we've seen. They're not telling us everything." "That much is obvious," Kane said, straightening. "The question is, do we wait for them to tell us, or do we find out for ourselves?" The Resistance's next operation was more ambitious than anything they had attempted before. Using the Vreeth transmission codes Myra had salvaged, they identified a key installation, an orbital relay station hovering just outside Earth's atmosphere. It was heavily guarded, but it held the answers they needed. If they could infiltrate the station, they might uncover the true nature of the Vreeth's agenda. The mission pushed everyone to their limits. Kane led the strike team, his determination masking the weight of responsibility he carried. Myra stayed behind, coordinating the operation from the ground, her sharp mind compensating for her absence on the battlefield. Jonah, despite his occasional bravado, was silent as they boarded the stolen Vreeth dropship. The fear was there, but so was the resolve. The approach to the relay station was harrowing. Automated defenses peppered their ship with plasma fire, and it was only through a combination of Myra's quick thinking and the team's desperate maneuvering that they managed to dock. Inside, the station was a labyrinth of alien technology and disorienting architecture. Every corner was a potential death trap, every corridor a battleground. The Vreeth defenders were relentless, but the resistance was more determined than ever. Kane led the charge, his every move calculated, his every order precise. Jonah's sharpshooting kept the team alive, while two other resistance fighters, Malik and Torres, used explosives to take out key enemy positions. They fought like demons, their survival instincts tempered by months of hard-won experience. At the heart of the station, they found what they were looking for, the main data core. Myra guided them remotely, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You're looking for a series of crystalline nodes. Their network disabled the encryption and I can pull the data." "Easier said than done," Jonah muttered, covering Kane as he worked. The room shook with the force of an explosion somewhere deeper in the station. "We're running out of time here." Kane's hands moved quickly, bypassing security protocols with the tools Myra had prepared. He could hear the approaching footsteps of Vreeth reinforcements. "Almost there," he said, more to himself than anyone else. With a final command, the encryption fell away. "Myra, you're up." "Got it," Myra replied, her voice tight. "I'm pulling the data now. Give me 30 seconds." They didn't have 30 seconds. The first wave of reinforcement stormed the room, plasma bolts flying. Jonah and the others returned fire, their cover quickly deteriorating. Kane fought to stay focused, providing just enough support to keep the team alive while protecting the data core. Myra's voice came through again, sharp and urgent. "I've got it. Pull out now." The retreat was chaotic. Kane's team fought their way back to the dropship, narrowly avoiding being overrun. Malik was hit during the escape, his body limp as Torres carried him onto the ship. Kane dragged Jonah aboard just as the dropship's engines roared to life. The station behind them exploded, a chain reaction of sabotage and overloading systems. Kane didn't look back. He was already thinking about what came next. The data they recovered changed everything. Myra spent hours analyzing it, and the more she uncovered, the darker the picture became. The Vreeth weren't just running, they were being hunted. The creatures Kane and his team had encountered before were just the beginning. The Vreeth called them the Harbingers, a race of bio-engineered monstrosities that consumed and assimilated entire worlds. The Harbingers were the reason the Vreeth had fled their home galaxy. They were the reason the invasion of Earth had been so brutal. The Vreeth hadn't come to conquer, they had come to fortify, to turn Earth into a last stand against the oncoming tide. But that wasn't the only revelation. The data hinted at something deeper, something buried in the genetic code of humanity itself. The Vreeth believed humans held the key to stopping the Harbingers, but the specifics were locked behind layers of encrypted data the Resistance had yet to crack. Kane's mind reeled as Myra explained it. Humanity wasn't just collateral damage in this war, they were central to it. The weight of this knowledge bore down on the Resistance. Some wanted to double down on the fight, to push the Vreeth off the planet and take their chances with the Harbingers. Others argued for a ceasefire, a desperate attempt to form an alliance with their former enemies. The debate threatened to tear the Resistance apart. Kane, too, felt the strain. He was a soldier, not a diplomat. Every decision he made seemed to carry the lives of hundreds, even thousands. Myra, who had always been his anchor, began to withdraw, consumed by her work and the grim implications of what she was uncovering. Jonah, once so confident, seemed to waver, his humor replaced by quiet brooding. Even Torres, one of the most steadfast members of the team, questioned their next steps. Amid the growing fractures, a new development brought both hope and fear. During another raid, a Resistance team stumbled upon a Vreeth prototype weapon, a massive device powered by an unknown energy source. Myra believed it might be capable of neutralizing the Harbingers, but its activation required technology and resources they didn't have. And the Vreeth, though reluctant to use it themselves, would undoubtedly protect it at all costs. The question loomed large: could they risk an all-out assault to seize the weapon? Or would the effort weaken them so much that they'd be helpless when the Harbingers finally arrived? As the Resistance prepared for their next move, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Vreeth weren't the enemy, not really. The Harbingers were coming, and humanity was still in the dark about what they truly faced. The data they had uncovered hinted at secrets that could change the course of the war, but without answers, those secrets were useless. And then came the betrayal. Kane returned to their base one night to find it in flames, Resistance fighters scattered and panicked. Someone had tipped off the Vreeth to their location, and the resulting attack had been devastating. In the chaos, key leaders of the Resistance were captured, and vital data including the files on the Harbingers was lost. As Kane stared at the ruins of their safe haven, his heart heavy with both anger and grief, one thing became clear: the war was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, about finding out who was working against them and why. Somewhere in the shadows, an even greater game was being played. And Kane knew the Resistance couldn't afford to lose.